Great to be amongst some colleagues, former colleagues, some peers, and generally just a wonderful group of people that I always learn a lot from. Hopefully you can see the screen that's being shared at the moment. Somebody give me a thumbs up if you can. Wonderful. Okay. So thank you all for being here. Very happy to talk about the AIA Framework for Design Excellence / COTE Top 10. Many of you may know that the framework was really adopted from the original COTE Top 10 measures by the AIA. And we want to briefly touch on just a brief overview, but really then dive into how some of the leading firms in Boston and in the country use this to address their design process and to push the industry forward. Let me see. Let me come over to screen 2 here, if I may. There we go. Briefly, my name is Jefferson Poole. I'm a design principal at Goody Clancy. The brains of the operation are the other 3, Kate, Jeff, and Liz. I'm going to give you a brief introduction of each of those. Many of you probably already know them, but I will still run through this quickly. Kate is Director of Sustainability and Building Performance at Arrow Street. She works to ensure building performance simultaneously creates social, health, environmental, and economic benefits for the people and places that are touched by Arrow Street's work. She directs Arrow Street's strategic building performance plan and brings her expertise in net zero embodied carbon integrated design, materials evaluation, occupant engagement, and building certification to all of their projects. Then these are somewhat sequential in terms of who will be speaking tonight. Kate will be followed by Jeff, who is Director of Sustainable Design at UTIL. He leads the firm's building performance initiatives and works with project teams to create energy efficient buildings and healthy, resilient spaces through energy modeling and design guidance. He has an MArch in building technology from MIT and a BArch from Rice University, and also teaches environmental building performance at RISD. And then Jeff will be followed by Liz, who is a building scientist at Payette. She has 18 years of experience in building performance analysis, sustainable design consulting, and engineering. So if there are technical questions, please send them to Liz and not those of us that are mere architects. Liz has a passion for climate action through performance of the built environment and brings a depth of technical knowledge to projects. She leads the development of glazing and summer comfort tool to complement Payette's winter comfort tool. Hopefully many of you have already used that in your workflows. And she's leading Payette's AIA 2030 commitment efforts. She's a tireless advocate for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and also serves on the City of Somerville's Commission for Energy Usage and Climate Change. So let's start briefly, which I think we all can agree is a fantastic shift, almost a sea change. In 2019, AIA recognized that high performance design, sustainable design, resilient design is good design. And so part of that is manifested in the creation or adaptation of the AIA Framework for Design Excellence. And so what's wonderful to see is this interweaving of some of those sustainability principles that many of you on this call have been advocating for and building into your own design processes, to see that recognized as being synonymous with good design by the AIA. As many of you probably know, there are 10 measures, principles, dimensions. The names sometimes change a little bit, but the themes are the same: design for integration, community, ecology, water, economy, energy, wellness, resources, change, and discovery. So this is a really holistic view of what makes excellent design and what makes a potentially sustainable project. This is not energy accounting by any stretch, but it's a comprehensive mix that really drives forward the design across our industry. A brief statement. These are areas for that we need industry-wide change. This is a growing into a movement that's really changing the industry that we work in for many better ways. And so any of the projects that are awarded, and now across the country, all of the local AIA chapters and the national chapter, they're starting to reflect all of these measures in award-winning submissions. So it used to be that there was that sustainability sometimes operated in a different lane and may have been recognized in a parallel lane. Now this is becoming effectively mainstream for all award submissions. As anyone on the call that's had to prepare an award submission knows, this is now bringing true accountability to many of the submissions. There are many resources that are available, including the COTE Top 10 Toolkit, the COTE Top 10 Super Spreadsheet. So these are resources that are available through the AIA website. And maybe if there are questions at the end of this, we can talk through how to use some of those. Generally speaking, there's a toolkit format that has prompts for the design team. And what's nice is that it really breaks it down into focus topics. And if you could do one thing, if you could do 3 things, do these 3 things. So it's very user friendly. There's also a long list of resources for further reading, and it really starts to highlight best practices, and it sort of picks exemplars from across these 10 measures. I'm going to skip through award submissions requirements. We've got 75 slides, so I'm trying to move very fast. But I think the overarching positive thing here is that this is bringing real data and accountability behind what is recognized as good design. And so this is a look at the 2022 COTE Top 10 winners. And what's important here is that 3 of our colleagues, both in Boston and on the call today, are part of the 10 of the most exemplary projects in the United States were designed in Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, and also by Boston, Cambridge, Somervillian firms. And so that was the prompt that we pulled together this conversation today. And what we want to do is hear from each of them about how they've integrated the framework into their workflows and what that means for their design process. So with that, I'll hand it to Kate.
Thanks, Jefferson. So I'm going to talk a little bit about King Open and then talk a little bit about our process. So this project, and I think you can go to the next slide. Go to the next slide. So this is the King Open Cambridge Street Upper School Community Complex. It's in Cambridge. We started this project in 2014 and it opened in August 2019. We submitted it, as Jefferson showed, to a 2022 COTE Top 10 award, obviously wanting to have multiple years of full occupancy, which was intermittent with the pandemic, to really look at a lot of the components that we could measure during occupancy. This particular project, you can go to the next slide, it's a large building. It's about 273,000 square feet. As the name kind of alludes to, it's many things. There is an elementary school, the King Open School. There's a middle school, which is the Cambridge Street Upper School. There's a preschool, as well as there's after school and community school. So there's essentially 4 school programs in here, as well as a lot of civic space as well for the community. So there's the Valente Branch Library, which is a branch of the Cambridge Public Library. There's a CPS, or the Cambridge Public Schools Administration, that is housed over on the right-hand side or the east side of the building. And there's a community pool. It's an outdoor pool and obviously has some indoor pool program as well. And really this particular project was a brand new building on a site that previously hosted many of these programs in much smaller versions, as well as a lot of asphalt and parking space. This particular project was all about bringing back open space and green space to the community, creating a civic amenity for the East Cambridge neighborhood, as well as the broader Cambridge neighborhood as well. So this particular project, as I mentioned, started in 2014. We spent about 12 months going through feasibility and schematic design and engaging the community. And that was a big piece of this, engaging the community, because this is a community building. So some of the achievements, and Jefferson already mentioned the COTE Top 10, but it is a net zero verified project. It's LEED B4 Platinum. It's the 2nd school in the country to do that. The other school was a very small school. So that was something we were really focused on in terms of sort of measuring and trying to make metrics. The COTE Top 10 obviously existed as measures. The toolkit didn't exist yet when we started this project, so I'll talk about that a little bit. And we were lucky enough to recently win the People's Choice Award for the Harrison Parker Award from the BSA. Let's go to the next slide. So really those, oops, go back one. Those many months of community engagement really led to what was the underpinning goals that the community really wanted to see be fostered and created in this building. So first and foremost, community amenity, that it was all about equity and inclusion. The two schools, the two main schools in this this project, equity and inclusion is really their social mission, and how do we foster that within the design, as well as understanding the equity and inclusion components of the greater community. That it's a healthy environment, not only interior to the space and the site, but also this building would be a net zero emissions building. There was most of you probably familiar that Cambridge in 2015, after we started this project, passed a zoning ordinance to be a net zero community. And so this is really the pilot project for that. And then obviously everything is learning centered, lifelong learning, not just from preschool to middle school, but also all of the community that comes into the building. How can education and learning be fostered through the whole community for lifelong learning? Go to the next slide. So in terms of approaching the project, and this is really part of our process at Aristry of going in looking at any project and setting goals and to understand how can we achieve them, is how can we set out a plan at the beginning. Really, it's a cyclical sort of, it's not really a line as this kind of shows, but it's really cyclical, but setting out a plan and then kind of going back to that plan throughout the process. So whether we're trying to achieve equity goals or net zero emissions or net zero water, like we were doing on this project, how can we go through that process and always prioritize and respond back to the community, back to the users throughout the whole process to make sure that we get buy-in, so that then when we go back and track all of these things in operation, and we're tracking those metrics, which we've done over the last 3.5 years, we can see that we're actually meeting those goals. And that's because of how much connection we had with the users who are operating the building at the end. So get the next slide. So I'm just going to talk about two of the measures. We're not really going to get into like a lot of the designer measures here today, but net zero emissions was obviously a very large goal for the project. Obviously it's a city-wide goal, but then also they wanted to understand how can this be a measure or a model for others, not just for the community of Cambridge, but Massachusetts and beyond. So it was a big undertaking when we looked at this, and we focused on design, we focused on MEP systems. You can kind of see some of the things that went into the project here. We looked a lot at measurement and verification, the operational side, and how occupant engagement really tied into all of the design components and the measurement verification components to be able to make sure that we would see a building that would be operating at the target EUI that we set. And thankfully, that building is doing that today. And then, of course, renewable energy to offset the energy that we're using in the building, which was mostly roof and facade mounted PV, and there's also solar thermal. Go to the next slide. And I'll just touch upon design for well-being, which it's now designed for well-being, not wellness. The measure has been renamed by the AIA, but just one component of that is indoor environment. And so we really focused on this particular project about indoor air quality with the displacement ventilation systems, the demand control ventilation, and the CO2 sensors we have in the space, but also focusing on healthier materials as a big component of this. And so if we go to the next slide, just talks a little bit about how we did that. Obvious things like low emitting, doing a full flesh out of the project, but also red listing materials and banning or avoiding certain chemical classes as well in all of the interior materials and furnishings. Go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, the spreadsheet and the toolkit didn't really exist for most of the design phase. We really did this at the end of the design and sort of like looked back. And so the super spreadsheet, which if you're not familiar with that, you can go on the AIA website and download the Excel file. And it allows you to put in different metrics around the 10 measures, and you'll get something like this. This is the one for King Open. that allows you to kind of graphically and quickly sort of see how you're stacking up against the different measures. It's not every measure, and I think Liz is going to talk about this a little bit more of all the other things that go into getting metrics. There's a lot of design processes and models and things that you go through. So not everything is in here that we track as a firm, but it is a good amount of things that we're kind of tracking across the 10 measures. So that's something that we've used since King Open, actually during the design phase on the projects. Go to the next. These are just some more images of the interior of the project. So, there's the spreadsheet, which is useful as you kind of move through design process, but it really starts at the very beginning and when you're setting goals for the project. So we actually don't start with the 10 measures. 10 is like a lot. When you're working with your teams and your owners, it's a little bit too much to comprehend sometimes. So we kind of start a little bit smaller. We have these 3 buckets of resilience, wellness, and sustainability. And we set some, high level overarching goals. We use it as a tool to work through with our development and project team. And then we eventually, in concept design and early schematic design, start to take those and morph them into the 10 measures. And so these are just some screenshots of like some of our tools, but so we'll kind of start bringing the 10 measures in and getting into more physical manifestation of what these goals will mean in terms of design or design process, because some of them, like equitable communities, there might be an ultimate design component in a project or in the site or the building, but there's also processes of how we want to engage the community, and those are tangible things that we're tracking and making sure that we're doing. So these are some things that we've been using on projects since King Open to really start to track the 10 measures and sort of outside of the spreadsheet of just a more easy way for our project team. So we run charrettes and workshops. We use that form on the right, and we're kind of tracking that real time on the project. Go to the next slide. So this is kind of an example of, that some of the things we would then communicate back to the owners, the developers we're working with, starting to highlight some of the major components of each of the 10 measures. And we update this, as the process and the project goes through design phases and even into construction of tracking how we're doing. Obviously, there's a lot of metrics and modeling and things we're doing in the back end to support these, but we always want to make sure everyone on the team knows like what the major components are that are meeting our goals. I think that's my last slide. Yep.
Great, thank you. Kate, there was a lot of dense information there, and you managed to get through it very succinctly. So I'm sure our those that are listening and will have some great questions afterwards. And then we'll pass it to Jeff. Jeff, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jefferson. Thanks a lot. Excited to be here to share a little bit of our work. I'll talk a little bit about the renovation of the Roxbury branch of the Boston Public Library. So looking at our approach to the framework through the lens of this one project. I am the Director of Sustainable Design at UTEAL. So we are the main designers of the project. This is with the City of Boston's Public Facilities Department and Boston Public Library. And we do, just before we continue, happy to talk also during our discussion about our kind of process for integrating some of the aspects of design excellence, ranging from energy modeling and thinking about economy and resilience. This project will focus on a few of the aspects, including design for equitable communities, integration, and well-being. Go to the next slide. Just to situate the project, it is the library's renovation project in directly adjacent to or close to Nubian Square in the Roxbury neighborhood. Next slide. Just a little bit of closer context. The building is the sort of squarish one on the left, close to the courthouse and near Nubian Square Station and the bowling building moving to the right. If you can go to the next slide. This is a renovation of an existing library, and the existing building was from 1978 by Kalman McKinnell Architects. It was designed in the brutalist style, very inward looking, kind of taking the approach of a library as a sort of a space that's disconnected from the busyness around. It's just a focus on the interior, and the architecture certainly expressed that. So in a couple of ways on the left, you could see that there's a sort of low visibility entrance that was really, you know, and oftentimes confusing and not clear how you enter the building. And on the right, viewing from Nubian Square, the building effectively turned its back with very low visual connection. On the next slide, please. Once you enter the building, this kind of feeling of being kind of closed off or disconnected also continued. The lobby was small and not open to the adjacent spaces. And then the main reading room, which is a big part of the renovation, was clad in sort of glass block that had very, didn't allow you to have a clear view from the inside out or the outside in. And just the next slide shows a couple of components of that reading room. From the exterior, the glass block kind of completely wrapped that volume. And on the right, you can see a mullion steel support for that curtain wall that had a lot of challenges thermally and was in very bad shape. The systems were also beyond their service life as well. So that was part of the challenge for this renovation. If you go to the next slide. So part of our process in thinking about this transformation of the building, I'll mention that, we started working on it from a feasibility stage in 2013. The actual renovation design started in 2017, and the building officially opened in 2021. But there was a very robust and a robust community process, 14 meetings where themes emerged about what was really important in terms of transforming the library. So a few of them are indicated here. So in no particular order, opening the library visually in the lower left to the surrounding neighborhood was a real important driver for the project. So connecting the library, integrating it with the neighborhood, both from being able to kind of have a view to the outside when you're inside the library, as well as when you're passing by to be able to see what's going on inside. Providing multiple spaces for community art through both the outside and the inside of the building, preserving vital existing programming. So things like the community room and a nutrition lab were parts of the renovation, either improving existing program or adding new program. Creating a welcoming entry facing Nubian Square, so reorienting the entry, which I'll talk about in a second. And then lastly, improving the comfort and performance of the building while preserving the kind of essential qualities of a brutalist building, which was a sort of guiding design aspect for this project. Next slide. So in terms of rethinking the program, we wanted to reorient the entrance so that when you enter, it's a clear entrance. You entered with a direct view of multiple aspects of the projects of the library's program, from the prominently located African American collection, which is part of the BPL, and then the community room, which is a multi-use space for the Roxbury community for different events, from movies to other kinds of concerts and all ages events. And then really kind of creating a visual connectivity through different aspects of the program, including on the left, there's a mezzanine level where there's a nutrition lab that has a visual connection to the entry, where there is education about food that happens in that flexible space. The next slide, please. So again, thinking about how we can kind of reconnect the building to its surroundings, that entrance and the presence of the library at Nubian Square is really critical. And so we added a canopy, which also addressed resilience issues related to extreme heat. Roxbury is one of the neighborhoods that is the highest risk for extreme heat. And then a clear line of sight to the entrance. You can go to the next slide. Entering into the library, which was once a very compressed closed off space, opening it up, expressing the brutalist concrete structure, while also creating kind of visual connections to the program and adding warmth back into the space by providing materials like wood that can help to kind of balance the concrete. The next slide, please. And then moving into that the reading room space, really thinking about how this space is a kind of critical moment for that visual connectivity from the inside out, as well as outside in. And so we accomplished that through replacing the deteriorating glass block with the high performance curtain wall, which we'll look at, and adding features like acoustically absorbing wood fins and other elements to help to provide that additional warmth. Next slide. So this really ties to our thinking about design for well-being. This new curtain wall, we selected the material thinking about what can enhance thermal comfort through a much higher performing material, visual comfort, and provide warmth to the building. So we arrived at this white oak timber curtain wall. And we wanted to think about, if you go to the next slide, how we kind of carefully tune the system, the glazing system, so that we can provide excellent daylight and solar control. And so the reading room curtain wall, we studied, for example, mullion depth using software in-house to evaluate glare probability and direct solar access into the building, to try to find at certain operating hours of the year, can the mullion depth itself provide some partial shading and solar control so that it can minimize the amount of time that the interior blind has to pull down. The next slide. And so focusing in on this particular element of the building, you know, not only does it provide sort of warmth and visual connectivity from the inside, but also when passing by the building from the outside, the curtain wall allows views in, and it provides a sort of warm glow that it in a way tries to sort of strike at that balance where we're trying to kind of preserve the essence of the existing brutalist building, but also celebrate the program that's going on in this really critical community facility. Happy to talk a little bit about other aspects of our process in this project. I know that we're tight on time, but thanks a lot, and excited to hear the remaining presentations.
I think you guys are doing a great job getting through a lot of content in a short amount of time. So I hope everyone's buckled up before we get started here. Well, hopefully use that to go to Liz. Sorry, Liz, I'm trying to advance and
no worries. I'm the naughty person who probably had too many slides, so that's why you put me last anyways. But I think we'll move through them quickly. You can skip over this slide. So I just want to say that I took a little bit of a different approach in putting together this presentation, and less so kind of focusing on the project that the Tufts University Science and Engineering Complex, and really looking a little bit more at kind of talking about our process overall. So hopefully you're not disappointed with that. If you're not familiar with Payette, we do work in two primary typologies: academic science and healthcare buildings. And so these are just very, complex, energy-intensive buildings, and arguably some, some of the most challenging to kind of move in the direction of sustainability and high performance. Next. And so I just wanted to note that I really think kind of being successful with integrating the principles that are within the framework for design excellence is really having a culture to support that. And so, being able to have support both from leadership top down, bringing up those voices from below in integrating across our projects. Next. So part of that is having a dedicated building science group at Payette. We have 4 of us that are full-time staff in building science, and we work, across all of our projects. And our purpose is really to support the project teams in integrating all the principles that are embedded within the framework for design excellence. And in addition to kind of being involved in all the projects are required to, budget hours for building science. So it's just kind of a given that everyone should be utilizing the resources that we have to offer. And then we also leverage kind of a pretty wide degree of embodied sort of knowledge across the staff. You can go to the next slide. And so just to give you a sense of kind of how we work, the building science group tends to be involved heavily kind of early on in our design process, even as early as, working on proposals and interviews. And then obviously, during the concept and sustainable and schematic design phases when we have kind of those most opportunities to help kind of steer things in the right direction. And then we tend to kind of taper off as we get into design development and later. Next. And so we don't have necessarily a formal process. We're not using the checklist or things like that on a regular basis as we move through projects, although we do have kind of like a lot of common analyses that we typically do. And the way that we approach it more so is to kind of, work with the project teams. Either they'll come to us, or if we haven't heard from them, we'll go and check in with them and find out what's going on. And usually they'll come to us with with a particular question or an issue, and we'll have a discussion about, what's the best way to kind of approach that from an analysis perspective. And also to Kate's point earlier, it is hard to do like everything on every project. So usually we're kind of looking for, what are the unique opportunities in this particular project that we can explore. Next. So in terms of the tools that we're using when we're doing this analysis, we're primarily working within the Ladybug and Honeybee set of tools. We do occasionally use other tools for CFD analysis, or sometimes we'll use Climate Studio depending on what we're doing. So if you go next, I just have kind of a handful of examples of the kinds of things that we're commonly doing. So this is an example for a project, where it was very early on, and we were sort of exploring different options for the massing and how the space kind of might be manifested. And this client was particularly interested in utilization of the outdoor space. And so we were looking at the spaces that are created between the different massings, and how do they influence the level of outdoor thermal comfort in those spaces. Next. We also very commonly are looking at net solar radiation. Both, we might use it at a level where we're comparing, 3 different types of massings. In this case, we had a project that was, pretty constrained in terms of the site boundaries. And so we were exploring ways that we could modify the facade to kind of take advantage of doing some self-shading and improve that overall performance. Next. We also do a fair amount of shoebox energy modeling and a lot of parametric analysis to kind of test the sensitivity of different options. So this is an example from actually a master plan. So there was a lot of things kind of up in the air. It's like, what exactly is going to go in this building, and what are the level of a lot of kind of levers to pull with the design decisions. And so this is a tool that we use. We can look at a lot of combinations of things and give this to the design team and let them kind of understand the sensitivity of these different choices on your EUI and peak loads. Next. And similarly, we do this kind of shoebox analysis and parametric modeling, also looking at different facade options, window to wall ratio, horizontal, vertical shading, the depth of shading, and we'll look at kind of daylight and glare and peak loads. Next. We also will often look at thermal comfort, both using our winter comfort tool that you may be familiar with, but sometimes there's some specialized cases where we want to understand in a little more detail what's going on. So this is an example from a new science building at Wesleyan University that's currently under construction, and we designed this lovely west-facing double facade. And if you're going to have a giant west-facing curtain wall, if you really want it to perform well and be comfortable, it can be quite complicated and expensive to do, but it performs really well. So in this particular case, we were looking at an automated Venetian blind and kind of looking at the impact of that shading to provide a thermally comfortable space so that people wouldn't be hot with the sun shining in there in the late afternoon. Next. We also sometimes will get into doing some two-dimensional CFD analysis where appropriate. This is an example from the National Coast Guard Museum that's currently starting construction. And they had this south-facing glass atrium that they really did not want to air condition. And so we were looking at, is it possible to naturally ventilate the space to at least not have it be hotter than it is outside on like a 95-degree day. And I would just say we're kind of big fans of the 80-20 rule, kind of putting in 20% of the effort for getting, 80% of the answer. So two-dimensional CFT is a lot less complicated and it runs a lot faster than a three-dimensional CFD. But next. And then again, therm analysis. This is an example that we are working on from an existing concrete building that has very old single glazed windows. And we were kind of evaluating a couple different options for, how we could improve that envelope on this existing building. Next. So that's kind of a high level smattering of kind of tools and analyses that we commonly use on our projects to look at envelope performance. But what we're really trying to get to is kind of that integrated design with envelope and mechanical systems achieving lower energy use. So this is an example from the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, which is just wrapping up construction. Next. And early on in design, we kind of did the sensitivity analysis looking at, what were the ways that we could lower the EUI. And there was a big change from going from a VAV to a chilled beam system and very small changes for changing the, envelope performance. Next. But those of you who are familiar with chilled beams will know that there's kind of a limit to their capacity. And if you go to the next slide, what we found on the top was the kind of original design, and the peak cooling loads exceeded that 8-foot chilled beam capacity. And so through an extensive parametric analysis, we worked with the design team to kind of optimize the design of the facade to kind of maintain the same design aesthetic, but reduce those peak cooling loads to enable the chilled beams to be used. Next. And then that in total was resulted in a 13% reduction in overall EUI for the building. Next. This example is the Soldiers Home in Holyoke. This is just wrapped up design. And this is a all-electric, net zero ready building and a long-term care facility. And when we started with this project, we were sort of building off of the Chelsea Soldiers Home, which is in construction now, also net zero, all-electric long-term care facility. And we wanted to look at, how could we kind of push this project even further in terms of performance. Go to the next slide. And so we were working with BR+A on this project, and we looked at a comprehensive life cycle analysis of going from what was the envelope design in Chelsea to like a passive house level envelope performance. And what we found was not only did that reduce the operational energy use, but it was actually a lower first cost because even though we were buying more insulation, we were buying fewer geothermal wells, and those were actually pretty expensive. So it made a lot of sense to go to that higher performing envelope. And you go to the next slide. We also took a look at the embodied carbon, and by using a low global warming potential XPS insulation, and we also had added from an aluminum frame curtain wall to a timber frame curtain wall, and then offsetting that with a reduced number of geothermal wells, we were also able to reduce the embodied carbon in the project. Next. So those are some of the ways that we've been doing this on projects. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about something that I think is fairly unique about Payette, and that is the research that we do. The research projects that are typically led within the building science department. You can go to the next slide. But we do engage the staff kind of across the studio. And this is one of the ways that we are able to kind of get that distributed knowledge into the project teams. And so I just have a couple of examples. Some of you may be familiar with this report that we put together several years ago on the thermal performance of facades, looking at our kind of standard details. and how we could improve them for reducing thermal bridging and getting the R values that we really wanted to get out of the assemblies that we were designing. You can go to the next slide. This is the glazing and winter comfort tool, and this grew out of a research project. We had a couple of projects where we were able to eliminate perimeter heating by using triple glazing, and we would go to the engineers and say, well, you know, what's that tipping point? Like how good does the envelope have to be before we can get rid of perimeter heating? And some of them would say, I would never get rid of perimeter heating, or when the windows is high performing as the wall. And we just didn't like that answer. So we kind of dug into that, and out of that came the development of this tool to help answer those questions and to do it in a way that's accessible for anybody, you know, at the firm to go and start to explore these things on their own and not necessarily rely on building science to do it for them. Next.
I'm going to interject, Liz, and say it's not just people in the firm, it's people outside, because we use this on many of our projects when we want a quick resource. So
that's great. It's good to know you're all using it. So this is really exciting. We are currently working on a glazing and summer comfort tool to account for the thermal discomfort from having the sun shining directly on you, as well as kind of a hours of direct sun, sort of a glare analysis kind of tool. So this is currently in beta testing in our office, and then we're hoping to be kind of rolling this out soon. Next. And as you know, that over the last, 10, 20 years, there's been a heavy focus on operational carbon and the green building movement. And now we're realizing that embodied carbon is actually really important as well. And so while our structural engineering friends have a lot to do with the embodied carbon in our buildings, being an architecture firm, we wanted to focus on the facades. And we started researching this a couple of years ago, trying to understand, when we're controlling for R value to kind of factor out the operational carbon impacts, what are the different embodied carbon impacts of the different types of facades that we're using? And so we created this tool called Kaleidoscope to try to make it like quick and easy for people at our firm or people at other firms to kind of make informed decisions early in design. At the same time, we're starting to roll out doing whole building LCA and using Tally as a tool, but a lot of times their decisions are made early on and we don't have a Revit model yet that we could use that tool. And so this was to kind of fill in the gap. Next. And we have added a couple of other modules, including flooring and ceiling assemblies, and there are more to come. I think the next one that we're going to be adding is partitions. Next. And then we've also layered in some health information. So Payette's material policy, we are working to avoid the use of highly fluorinated compounds, antimicrobials, flame retardants, and vinyl in our projects. And so we've layered in some of that information along with the embodied carbon information to help select more health-friendly materials as well. Next. And then the happy result of all of this next is that we have been awarded 6 AIA COTE Top 10 awards in the last 6 years, including next the Tufts. The most recent one is the Tufts Science and Engineering Complex. Hopefully you won't be disappointed that I didn't give you a whole background on this project in particular, but there's lots of great information on the AIA COTE Top 10 award site, and you can always reach out to me and we can talk about it some more too. Thank you.
Great. Oh, well, that was just, a tour de force of process and tools and results, which I don't know. This is a wonderful dive into each of your respective firms' ways of thinking and ways of working. So we wanted to then leave lots of time for questions. I'm sure there's a number of people on the call that want to know a little bit more. So I'd love to just open it up. I don't know if anyone wants to just launch in. I cannot see all the people at the moment since I'm sharing screen and presenting. Who wants to be the brave person to ask the first question?
Hey, Liz, can I ask a quick question for you?
Of course.
You mentioned in your presentation that you require all projects to have a budget, if you will, for sustainable design. Can I inquire what that budget might be?
That's a good question. I don't actually know. I think it's like a certain percentage of the hours. I'd have to ask. I don't know off the top of my head. I just know that we have that included in the project budgets.
Liz, is it effectively a time budget?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I do have, it depends on the project manager. I mean, sometimes they will kind of reach out to us at the beginning of a project and, you know, sort of discuss specifically like what we're going to do at each phase and kind of and budget for that accordingly. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't be more specific.
And I see hands coming up, but please feel free to just jump in with a question.
Hello, my name is Keely, and I had a question. We were looking at how do we guide clients in appropriate goal setting? And I'm wondering if you all have figured out, like, do you have baseline goals that are appropriate targets that you kind of have like back of the envelope calculations or research that you've done from other projects that you can guide your clients on what to achieve? Or is it a more organic process, or do you have like, you know, more formulaic checklist kind of ways of doing it? Or how do you engage the client in the beginning stages, especially if they are not as, you know, sustainably minded or knowledgeable?
Kate, I want to redirect that to you because I think you touched on goal setting in your portion of the presentation. And I know you mentioned that we've got the grid of the 10 different measures that sometimes is overwhelming or daunting at the beginning. And it seems that you've created your own mechanism to sort of condense that. And I don't know if you want to touch on how you integrate. Is that goal setting internal with your project team, or does that include external with the client?
So it's both. And I think that, Kayla, that's a great question, because some clients have perceived notions of what they want to do, and other people are just not familiar at all of where they should start. So it kind of varies depending on which client you're working with, but starting with those sort of 3 buckets, I don't really like the term buckets, but just use it all the time. Resilience, wellness, and sustainability. That is a way that we kind of start to have that conversation of, you know, what should we be looking at when we want to make a healthy building, a sustainable building, a building that's going to last and be resilient to climate change or other impacts that are site specific to a project. And so we start with that conversation of, you know, if we think about it from these 3 perspectives, we should be addressing all of them to some extent. And then it's like, well, how much are you focusing on wellness or sustainability, resilience? And that really gets more specific to the client. So we do a lot of time talking about like, what does the client want from the project? Even, you know, beyond those 3 buckets, just what do they want for the client? What do they want for the occupants, for the community they're serving? You know, depending on what type of project it is, we do, you know, lots and lots of different types of projects. So starting there, and then we make connections between that conversation and those 3 things: resilience, wellness, sustainability. How can those things support what they want the project to do? And then that eventually that flows into what are the goals. We also internally, before or after, during whatever, you know, that piece that where we're having the client conversation, we also, because get to your other question of, are there certain things you know that can be achieved? If it's a school, if it's an office, if it's a lab, if it's retail, et cetera, there are things that we know are readily achievable within the budget or the type of building that it is. And then we know things that are things that we could aspire to. And so we will talk about that as a team, meaning just the architecture team, but also the architect and the consultant team. And so we'll have ideas of what can be achieved, so that when we are having those first conversations with the clients, we have ideas of what we know can easily be achieved. And then of course we have benchmarks of very specifically, like what's the EUI for this project, or how much water reduction we can get, or et cetera. But that's sort of how we approach it. And then, once we start having these very high level kind of aspirational goals in those three aspects, then we start to like hone in, okay, where do those fall in the 10 measures? What is the actual design strategies we're going to explore? Because there'll be multiple ones, and eventually we'll get to the final strategy. But it all starts in that high level of those three pieces.
Thank you.
Who else wants to jump in with a question? We've got a lot of assembled knowledge here for you to tap into. All right, I'm going to buy everyone a little time to think. I'm going to throw a question of my own out there. Could any of you talk about the ways in which you approach an existing building versus a new construction? So, if we look at the BPL Roxbury project, that was a creative reinterpretation of an existing building. And if we look at the King Open School, that was a new construction, although it replaced something else. And Liz, I'm not 100% sure, but the Tufts is an addition to an existing building. I don't know if there's renovation scope. And so those are three different pathways, right, in which they are all delivering high performance and meeting some impressive metrics, but they involve different challenges when you're intervening within an existing. So I don't know if you want to each take a bite of that apple and then pass it to somebody else. We'll start with Kate.
Yeah, I mean, I think specifically for King Open, it was a no-brainer that it was going to need to be an existing building. Removing the existing building and an all-new construction building. The existing space was just completely inadequate for the types of things that they needed to do in the building and the number of students and community that they served. It was just, there wasn't really anything that we could salvage from it. I would say with a lot of our other projects, we were actually just doing our end of year metrics for 2022, and the majority of our work is existing renovations or addition renovation projects. And so, the way we typically approach those projects is really trying to figure out like what's the amount of impact, right? So we do a lot of embodied carbon analysis. Recently, I used the CARE tool, which is a new tool. It's in beta, so that was really interesting to be able to test that tool out as opposed to jumping right into a larger LCA on our projects. To look at like what's the impact of embodied carbon, like how much renovation, how much can you salvage versus new, and like what's that balance. And so we're always thinking about that from operational as well as embodied carbon. That's one of the big pieces that we're kind of thinking about when we approach an existing project.
Jeff, do you want to pick up from there and talk about ways in which some of the strategies might be very different when you're intervening within an existing building?
Sure. Yeah, I'm definitely to follow on some of Kate's comments. We have a similar interest in understanding, the potential to offset embodied carbon emissions by reutilizing or transforming, preserving existing buildings. I've opened the CARE tool, and I'm really interested in using it on future projects. It wasn't an analysis that we did on the Roxbury branch project, but a driver for that one was really, the kind of the essence of the brutalist building. We've done some work with other Kalman McKinnell projects like Boston City Hall, where that's more of a sort of preservation approach. The question that came up for this project was really, how do we infuse new life in this existing building while, still keeping the sort of the overall structure and materiality, asking questions like, is it feasible, cost effective to achieve the outcomes that we want related to, indoor comfort, indoor air quality, thermal comfort, energy performance. And there's, like Kate had touched on, usually sort of pros and cons analysis, and cost benefit has to also be evaluated there too. And so, that's, certainly something that informs our approach when we tackle a project like this.
So I'll just add to that. The Tufts project was initially envisioned as kind of demolishing that smaller brick building that was down the hill and building a larger science building in that location. And so we worked with the client early on in design to arrive at a solution that was an addition and that was smaller and preserved the existing building. And then another project comes to mind. I mentioned the Science Center at Wesleyan University with the double facade, and sort of opposite that, there's a existing brick building, Shanklin Hall. And early on in the project, there was a question about whether or not Shanklin Hall should be renovated alongside a new science building, or whether or not it should be demolished and that area for that program go into a bigger new science building. And so one of the analyses that we did was just looking at, just like on a per square foot basis, the embodied carbon impacts of, demolishing that building and versus preserving it. And that was one of the pieces that we used to inform the decision about whether or not we should keep that building.
Great. I'll say I'm really happy to hear, Kate, that you've started to use the CARE tool. For those that you don't know, that's a carbon avoided retrofit estimator, which is, I think the launch was last week, but that's been in development for a while. Maybe Laura would love to hear this. Maybe we can get somebody to present on that. Someone who sits about 20 feet away from me was one of the founding persons on that. So, as always, sort of the tools are ever growing. And I think certainly some of the tools that you had highlighted, Liz, are I find very easy to use. And I think there's this, we've got to toggle between sophistication and ease of use, and making sure that it's dumb enough that architects can use it. And I say that with respect for engineers and all that they do. Are there, let me ask a general question for anybody. Are there other tools out there that have helped you all achieve sustainable goals or high performance? Are there ones that haven't been mentioned today? Oh, I see Peter Kleiner's phone has its hand up. Pete, I hope that was intentional.
Jefferson, it's been a while. I was going to build on the question you were just asking in the different ways. There are a lot of tools, and I think on some projects that I appreciate the question about sort of as project managers, how much budget do we reserve for doing some of these sustainability issues? Because I think sometimes I want to know. So my question is actually fairly simple. What's everyone's experience in sort of integrating these tools and learning the tools? And so for staff that haven't used Tally or haven't used CARE, like what's the barrier of entry, and how much time should we allot to sort of bring people up to speed on these tools?
I can start with an answer. And then,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think the answer is going to be very different based on the size of the firm, the amount of resources that are available. And so I think all of us are trying to calibrate, you need the right tool at the right time to do the right task. And we, love to compete with PayAd and always say, okay, we've got an uphill mountain to climb, because I think there are resources there that are leading the industry. Having said that, what we try to do is build sort of pinnacles of knowledge within certain folks, and then try to diffuse that knowledge more broadly across the entire team. At least in our office, we're trying to make sure that resources are pretty scarce in terms of people and hours, but how can we make sure that we're effective at sharing the knowledge well enough so that there isn't a bottleneck of any one person? So that would be my answer. But I'm sure the answer, with 4 firms here, the answer will be very different from each firm.
Yeah, I would say that it all depends on what you're doing. You actually mentioned 2 embodied carbon or life cycle assessment tools. Those are actually easiest for people to get into. They tend to be the simplest. They're the easiest that I found for a majority of staff to be able to pick them up very quickly. They're really focused on one piece. So I think that's another reason they tie into systems and modeling that people are already doing. And, so embodied carbon is something we've been able to roll out much more readily on every project. We use light stanza for daylight and different lighting scenarios. I think that's been easy for people to pick up, and the time commitment is pretty minimal, but it's really impactful to our designs as architects. So we really been focusing on things that impact our design from the architectural standpoint, our massing orientation, our design of outdoor space and how it relates to our building, and focusing on those particular types of tools that help us do that. And so the more complex projects, it takes longer, and simpler projects are easier. So it varies.
I'm just sorry for interrupting. In terms of workflow, when are you doing starting to integrate the use of those tools?
It'll be different on what tool you're using, but typically in schematic design, you want to do a lot of these analyses because that's where you're going to make your biggest impact on the design. And then, trying to make sure we're going back and checking them. So it's not just a point in time for anything like LCA or something that can be affected over time. We want to make sure we're always kind of going back and checking that. And so now we're at the point where we do have projects that are in construction. And so now we'll be doing sort of as-built life cycle assessments. So that is, something that we're kind of continuously doing, just like we're not doing energy modeling. We don't really do any energy modeling in-house. But, making sure that we're checking over time to see that we're still moving in the right direction.
I could just quickly build on these, in total agreement about, the kind of problem you're trying to solve. Early tools like the ones that Liz and Kate mentioned, we use like Climate Studio, which is integrated to Rhino, and architects, across the office can easily set up a solar orientation analysis. But then we also, for more complex modeling like passive house modeling, which we do perform in-house, we've set up some, until recently, where we have dedicated building performance specialists, but staff architects help make the thermal model, the geometry for it, which has been a good collaboration because then they're understanding the thermal envelope, the extents of the enclosure, window wall ratio, things like that, and then kind of hand it off to the energy modeler to bring it actually into the more technical software. And there's a little bit of collaboration in terms of like how their geometry translated to those inputs. So that's been one way, and that might be something that we can have a separate conversation about, as the stretch code might mean that there's more passive house projects, but that's been one workflow that's been effective for us.
I hadn't been monitoring the chat here, but I see a question from Patrick. Could the presenter speak to the post-occupancy troubleshooting and energy performance data collection process for their COTE Top 10 submissions? Any challenges or surprises? How much effort was this? Does anyone want to wade into that?
I can provide a quick answer, then also probably what will have to be a follow-up note to Patrick about next steps. But for the Roxbury library, we requested some utility data and found that the actual operating performance was higher than expected, and that had to do with a few reasons, COVID, as well as some controls related to systems that were not properly commissioned or calibrated that needed some additional commissioning. So we understand that things are kind of back to as expected now, but I do need to follow up with you to figure out exactly, how we're doing in terms of performance. So, and yeah, we hope to have a more robust kind of post-occupancy effort in the next year or so.
Kate, I think you had touched on this at the beginning of yours about wanting to wait a number of years to get full occupancy during there was a hiccup of the pandemic in which all data sets were thrown off, and then the building would have been designed before that. And then you want to talk about any unexpected or challenges or surprises?
I would say in terms of collection, yeah, usually when we ask, or many times when we ask for data, we get utility bills, which are helpful, I guess, to get a total amount of energy. And then if it looks like really high or something, we can kind of like point that out. But for King Open, they actually have a really nice BMS system and a dashboard. So I have access to that. I mean, you can see a lot of it publicly, but I also can get into the back end of that. So I can go in and look at all of the metering points. And I did notice something that, the school didn't know, because they're still opening this building. They have other new buildings. They're doing, building another new school soon, or in the middle of construction. So they're still on their end, getting their operational staff up to speed to be able to go in and notice what I noticed, where I was like, one wing of the building is using like some crazy lighting load. What's going on in this one space? So they're not there yet, but they do have a commissioning agent that's on call. So they have somebody who basically is there for them all the time, helping them continuously commission their buildings, which, we do recommend for clients. They need to think about commissioning multiple years after the building's open. From day one in schematic design, who's going to operate the building? There's going to be outside consultants that you're going to hire for different types of maintenance. Who's going to be in-house? How are you going to operate the building? So that is definitely something we talk about a lot. Cambridge has kind of set themselves up in a good position over many years of, working on projects in the city. So yeah, for that particular project, it was easy to get the data. Other ones, it's not. And so when you just get like here's our electric for the year, you can't really tell too much from it. But we have more projects that are doing much more metering to a level that's not crazy, but allows you to actually like see information. And we've been able to get access to that, which is great.
Right. Can I ask a follow-up question? I think in one of your slides, you talked about ways in which you're driving towards zero. And I think part of that was user education and getting to changing habits, which can really ultimately only be measured post-occupancy, right? And I think in your sort of gradient stepping down, that was 5 EUI, at least in that chart, right? And that was the same sum total of envelope changes. So I don't know if I'm trying to tie two threads together here, whether there's ongoing user education efforts, as you're continuing to monitor the building and understand ways in which it's being used in real life and in real time, if there's other sort of user engagement opportunities.
Yeah, so King Open, obviously the pandemic put them into a disadvantage of trying to roll some of these things out, but their dashboard is there. It's available for them to use, and to use. The school really wanted to use it for their problem solving curriculum. I know that they've done that a little bit, but they haven't been able to do it to the extent that they want, because obviously their curriculum is something that's very, very hard to develop and implement. So, and they've gone through a process of, hiring someone on their operations side and their maintenance staff to track multiple buildings, including King Open, to help, with that piece of it. And it's a work in progress. Other clients, they have more readily dedicated people to help them with that. So I would say that piece where you saw the EUI go down from occupant engagement, we are at the EUI, or the building is at the EUI that we targeted. And we did model different components that were specifically from the occupant engagement piece of it, of things that they were committing to do, in terms of how they use the building, what they did for set points, the amount of equipment they put in for plug loads and things like that. And so we did model them to understand, like, without that buy-in, without that engagement piece, we wouldn't have gotten those extra reduction in energy. So I think they're doing something right, because when they, if we take all the unoccupied pandemic time out, they're hitting that UI. And so I was just over there a few months ago and talking to the principals and stuff, and it's continued through 3 years. They're really committed to doing what they had said they were going to do in terms of behavioral changes and how they're going to use the building.
That's great. Great to hear. Any additional questions? Oh, there's one in the chat. Have any of you had success in the designing for change category? I'm going to take the silence as being no, but
I can
I
talk
know
to
that's
that, but
not
I feel
true.
like I've been talking a lot, but I can talk to it if you want. So for that particular measure, for example, at King Open, was really focusing on the resilience, the climate change vulnerability assessment that the City of Cambridge had done around the beginning of the project, and some of the social and financial and flooding and extreme heat vulnerabilities that they had identified for the site. And thinking about this project, obviously things were flooding. We elevated the floor pieces of mechanical equipment in the lower level that's elevated. But then also thinking about how can this be a space for the community, especially extreme heat was one of the biggest vulnerabilities that they identified for the site. So putting back that acre of green space. Copley Wolf is gonna be mad at me that I can't remember, but it was like 150 trees that were either preserved or planted on the site, the splash pad, the pool, basically having ways for people to come and get out of the heat, and also obviously reducing the heat island. So those are just some components in that the change measure.
That's great. And I think, in many ways, Jeff, the BPL project, I mean, it's starting from a position in which you're fundamentally adapting an older resource to breathe new life into it. So you're starting with a lot of pre-existing capital in this category. But
Yeah.
How do you then take it to the next level, right? What are ways in which you anticipate future changes or changing markets?
Yeah, it's interesting. Some existing buildings follow that kind of sort of saying of long life, loose fit. Others are really kind of purpose built to the inch. This building was really kind of to the latter in terms of HVAC systems and infrastructure. Shafts, chases, things like that were really, really bare bones and difficult to work with. And so we wanted to kind of find ways to accommodate ventilation, not just electrical, but also like IT infrastructure, while still, working within or sometimes around these existing, the existing bones, right? And so that included trying to find new risers, providing infrastructure in places for IT and electrical for, obviously what's now a much more digital way of experiencing a library. So those are the sort of things that we thought about. Also about the exterior of the building and touching on the comments about like resilience to, well, in this case, extreme heat, providing some ability to have shaded outdoor spaces, meeting Boston Water Sewers, infiltration requirements through the minimal landscape that we were able to accommodate here.
So I was just looking on my phone to refresh my memory about another project, the science building at Lafayette, and which was a 2021 COTE Top 10 winner. So you can go on the website and read more about this. But we did do like a passive survivability analysis for that project because it was located in an area where they were kind of prone to having extended power outages. And so from looking at that analysis, the team decided to add the fan coil load onto the emergency generator to just make that building a little more resilient to that, to any future instances of power outages. So I just wanted to throw that out there as someplace where we were able to respond to the design for change.
Great. All right. Any final questions? We'll call this a survivors club. There's still 16 people that have hung in there and stayed with us through these questions. I think there's been, you know, great both questions and answers, and it's certainly been informative for me. I always enjoy learning what everyone else is doing and finding ways that we can raise our own game. You know, I think it's always been one of the benefits of being in a great community like Boston, in which we're you know, there's a collective desire to do better and to share advice and knowledge that helps everyone else raise the bar. So the bar is already set high with some of the talent that we have in Boston, and it continues to sort of spur us forward to do great design.
Thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to share.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all, and everyone still on. Thank you for listening in, and it's a great presentation. And thank you, Jefferson. You summed it up very well. And please check back on the COTE site, and we'll have some more talks listed soon. Hope to see you all there. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.